3. Okay, go ahead.
All right, let's get started then. I'm very happy to be here, having the chance to have a conversation with Marilyn Hamilton about what co-creating Europe and the integral city meshworks can learn from each other, how they can inform each other, and how the different systems and essentials that both of our organizations have been developing really get into dialogue to impact each other and have greater emphasis. So I'm really happy for this to happen and take the inquiry further.
Good morning, Julian.
Hi, Marilyn.
Yeah, it's beautiful to be here with you. I'm in Scotland today, in Findhorn, where I live, and it's a beautiful new summer day. So this is a great way to start and connect with the rest of Europe. So I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I can add to that. I'm in Berlin. Very, very warm day coming up as well. Actually, a lot going on in the city today. It's very alive. There is a huge Black Lives Matter demonstration happening with probably around 30,000 participants. There is a manifestation happening to raise money for Pride in terms of COVID. So it's boiling and bubbling. And after our conversation, I will go and engage in that.
And here, in Scotland, we're coming into a new phase of coming out of lockdown. So Findhorn has often been like a destination place for people to come, but we've had restrictions on being able to go and visit places for only 5 miles. But that has been lifted this weekend. So we may see some more visitors here, and we're still really in a stage where we don't have any services to offer except nature, so people can walk out into the dunes. So it's we're noticing in a committee that we were going backwards. We had sort of gone into deep lockdown and worked our way through there, and now we're coming out. And so we're remembering the stage we were at before when we were coming in, and it's an interesting way to notice how we're connected with one another and connected with the rest of the world, and connected with our eco-region, which I think is part of the core of our discussion today.
Yeah, for sure. It's really interesting because Berlin is it's already coming out of the lockdown for about a month. Mm-hmm. But it's still, it hasn't reached the level of energy like before. And it's really interesting how many people I talk with engaged in different fields of society are really struggling at the moment with going back to normal. There is a great refusal to go back to normal, but really answers how to organize the urban life in Berlin, different from before, are just very slowly arising. They're not yet found. So I feel there is a great need for dialogue between what you've been calling the 4 voices of the city, which is I think a great need for. So I'm very happy we have this conversation in this time to see if we can get a little more clarity what can be done and which dialogue should take place to really create a new and better normal.
I think that's a really interesting observation, because I've been noticing how those 4 voices are rebalancing. They're really negotiating for a different space, different weightings in how they're being expressed and also how they're being heard. So, what I think would be really interesting in our conversation, if you could create a context for the co-creating Europe and share some of the essences that you discovered. And then let's see how the integral city frameworks and voices fit into that. and maybe give us a little story about how did Co-Creating Europe start? I think that's an interesting story.
Yeah, gladly. Co-Creating Europe is an initiative that exists for about 3.5 years now. And the impulse to create it was given by Annette Kaiser, a spiritual teacher from Switzerland, together with the philosopher and publisher Thomas Steininger and children's rights and democracy activist Sonja Student. And the idea was arising at the Integral European Conference many years ago, where the constellation about the future of Europe was held. And Annette was placed to be the mother of Europe. And she really felt how this role was suitable for her and how she was embodying it also in her thinking and in her teachings. So she really felt the need to keep this impulse alive. And together with Sonja and Tom, who all have great networks in Europe and beyond that have been growing over decades, they decided to start connecting spiritually aligned social change activists from different countries, regions, and cities to foster a dialogue about what a new version of Europe could be like, how Europe could become a hub for post-national forms of society. And I'm very sure cities play a key and major role in that for sure. But first of all, the great challenge we were facing in Co-Creating Europe when I came on board as the managing director about 1.5 years ago was how do we even make this dialogue happen between so many different cultures, languages, and backgrounds? How can we synergize this multiplicity of voices and create something that would be like a choir or a bouquet of flowers that reassembles these voices and holds and presents them in their unique beauty? So we had long dialogues around that with our participants, with activists, with spiritual teachers, but also just with citizens from many different countries, and defined something that we call the essentials, which is, I would say, 8 basic values that we think can be in the center of a new version for Europe. And through a long dialogical process of figuring out what these essentials could be like, a great coherence in the group had already been created, and we realized that these essentials have really a power to be understood internationally and across borders, especially as they all have a little icon. So you cannot just access them intellectually, but also really visually, and you can connect to them through the heart. So this is what has been created by Co-Creating Europe so far. And this year, and I think we can talk about that later a bit, we decided to collectively step into action in a very particular way in the Caravan of Unity that is also initiated and inspired by Unity Earth. And I'm aware that this Unity Week happening now is kind of a takeoff towards the celebration of Peace Weekend on the 21st of September 2020, a little less than 3 months from now. So we're really creating this energy of unity, and what Co-Creating Europe really wants to do is carry out that essentials into the world in all different ways you can imagine, individually, collectively, in communities, in our thinking, acting, speaking. So I would say this is what Co-Creating Europe and its friends and affiliates assemble around.
That's a beautiful summary, and it reminds me of earlier in the week we heard from Thomas Steininger and Elizabeth Diebold talking about the essentials of Co-Creating Europe. I think you were also part of that discussion, and it was in the same convergence room. And for our listeners today, can you remind us what those essentials are? Are you even able to show us the images on the screen? Because I find them very beautiful and compelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just opening our website. I will name them first. It's prior unity, universal spirituality, evolutionary and integral, freedom and human rights, global and in solidarity, transsecular. And now I'm having them here, sharing my screen.
Oh, there they are. Oh, they're so, every time I see them, my heart quickens.
Maybe I can say also a word about the creation process of these icons that I feel makes them really tangible and accessible. Mm-hmm. Because of course there is a great overlap in them, and all of these essentials form a different kind of unity in themselves. They are kind of holistic in that way. So it was very important for me to have them created in a way that would show their connection. So they're all created out of circles. So this is how this design has been arising. Mm-hmm.
One thing I noticed that seemed a variation extension this time around, and it might have been just because they were first released when I was in Plovdiv last year when we were having our Co-Creating Europe conference, that evolutionary got linked with integral, which I like. And I hadn't noticed that the integral was there before. I thought of it as just evolutionary, and I noticed in the blog that I wrote just after that time, I just called it evolutionary. Am I remembering incorrectly, or is that a new development?
I think it was always there. It just hadn't. It might have been that we named it just evolutionary at the point, but I know that the integral is also very, very dear to Sonja Student. So, co-founder of the Integral Academy and very, very active in the Integral Forum in Germany. So having the integral approach in co-creating Europe was always very dear to her.
Yes.
And at the same time, I think what is maybe worth mentioning is that we see evolutionary and integral as just as one of the essentials, because integral sometimes has the understanding to be all-encompassing and all-embracing and transcending it all.
Yeah.
And for us, this is one perspective on it, but we feel that really for a broader vision of Europe, these all have to stand equally next to each other and be equally in the focus.
Yeah, and I thought in the conversation the other day between Elizabeth and Thomas that the aspect of the holographic nature of these also came out, so that if you dive into any one of them deeply, the others are disclosed. And that's also one of the nice variations in the dance, the fact that, dialogically you emerge an evolutionary complexity, or the universal spirituality is connected deeply to a deep ecology, or that word global that is becoming more widely used right across this whole conference is becoming connected with prior unity and freedom and human rights. And I remember the other day, Thomas and Elizabeth paused on transsecular, because for many people, that's a whole new word. Did you want to say something about that today? Because I also find it fascinating.
It's indeed the essential that is maybe intuitively the hardest one to access. And actually, it's my personal favorite, though.
Okay.
Because transsecular wants to emphasize that we very much in the integral sense of include and transform, that Europe has, of course, a great tradition of enlightenment, of science, that has produced a very special knowledge forming the modern and the postmodern age, and highly informing that and leading to innovation, basically structuring the world we live and think in most of the time today. And it's often played out against the spiritual. Like there is very often a very dualistic experience between, say, science and spirit, or the brain and the heart. And Transsecular really emphasize the need and the vision to bridge this, to combine and to hold, to create a mindset where this is not a paradox anymore, or opposing forces, but that actually science and spirituality and mysticism really can only together create the knowledge that is deep and comprehensive enough to be at the fundament of a vision for future societies and future ways of living together. And Europe, of course, holds also the very rich mystical tradition. And if we can integrate that with science, and I think there is a lot happening in the program of World Unity Week around that as well. Yeah, it's very important to us, but always needs lots of explanation.
Yeah, oh, I think it's a very interesting trans part. I can't remember the proper English grammatical name, but that prefix, I think. Mm-hmm. It opens up a lot of discussion and worldviews. I know here at Findhorn we've talked lots about intergenerational tensions, and I had a interesting discussion when I offered to my person in dialogue with, I said, well, how about looking at it as transgenerational? And all of a sudden she woke up and went, oh, well, that just sort of paints a whole different picture that does actually allow for it to be transcended and included. So we can do intergenerational, but there's something more beyond that. It's both more complex and, as you say, deeper. So I think it's a very powerful quality that has been included in the essences, the essentials. Yeah. So. Yeah,
and I feel what you're just saying resonates so much, and what is, I think, where now I'm looking at it is really as more, of course, more than secular, and having the spirituality, having the idea of prior unity informing the secular, and therefore lifting up to a new level of understanding is important. How I can summarize it after also hearing you speak about it.
Yeah, it's even in our discussion yesterday where Kara was present, who's doing our tech support today, she was we were having an exploration of the meshworking cities and ecoregions, and I said it wasn't just intergenerational but transgenerational, and it opened up a much more fluid discussion where we could see the interpenetration of the lives that had come before and that were unfolding now. So through the youngest of us and even their children. So I think it's sort of like a powerful directionality. And that's something when I'm doing the integral city work fascinates me, that I think that cities are evolutionary, and that in fact I've created some what I would call intelligences, but they're the essentials of the city as I've looked at it. And I wrote my first book about what I called evolutionary intelligences for the human hive. So I can unpack a lot of that through these essentials, but right in the center of those intelligences was the evolutionary intelligence, which holds the prior unity, which holds evolutionary and integral, holds universal spirituality, holds deep ecology, it is definitely a transsecular essence or intelligence. So that has actually continuously helped me continue to learn about how to think about cities through, first of all, an integral model. So that would be dear to Sonia. But for me, the integral model is also evolutionary by design. It has the indications in it in the way that not only are there 4 quadrants, but there are the growing dimensions and circles of care that are embedded in it, the circles of complexity. And also that it's a living system. So lots of people who look at an integral model sort of get stuck by the geometry of it and think of it as rather static, whereas for me it's very dynamic, very living. And that's why I dared to pair it with the human hive. So to be able to think about another species, the honeybee, which is 100 million years old, many years older than the human species. And I became curious then through biomimicry, through a living system, to see what I could see in cities and reframe them. So you've been talking about co-creating Europe as coming into existence in the last 3 years, and I've been exploring this integral map related to communities and cities for 20 years now, so for 2 decades or more. And it feels that this celebration in the World Unity Conference is this week a real coming of age, if you will, of this way of trying to think about cities. But I was sharing with Kara yesterday, it hasn't been an easy journey, because when I first proposed a whole new paradigm to look at cities, there was a lot of either disinterest or resistance in people who are usually in city discourse. And the integral movement often did not consider the city as a scale, an actual scale of human systems that had its own capacities to influence change. And there was also this shocking sort of juxtaposition of an integral model with biomimicry, which was new when I put it out there in the first book when it was published in 2008. So it has, as you can see, lots of these essences kind of woven in the fabric. And that's one of the reasons it feels so affirming to have these essences disclosed in a way at, in fact, a meta eco-regional scale, if you want to think about Europe that way. So that's why this conversation is really interesting to me.
Yeah, it's really exciting to explore the synergies and how really I'm very happy to hear how the essentials are lining up with what you've been developing in the integral city. I think what you're doing with looking at the integral city and your concept of city and eco-regions, it's also, if I'm not wrong, building a vision that is transnational. Come back to the transcending it. And I'm of course very curious what this could mean for Europe, or how Europe made out of cities and eco-regions could actually look like and help bringing these essentials to life and really grounding them at the core of society. What you've mentioned, I think my favorite term or phrase that from your work is the cities as Gaia's reflective organs. Really, the cities and looking at, I feel the new paradigm is very much looking at the cities as something alive, as living systems, and at the same time as an organ being part of a bigger living organism. And seeing that organism being structured in cities and ecoregions. Would be very interested if you would say that cities have a particular role for Europe, or what makes cities in Europe so important, and maybe such a good model to look at these new post-national forms of society. So I'm sure there are specificities of Europe with this high density of cities.
Yes, well, you know, what if I could share my screen? Because I would like to just draw from a blog that we've already put the link to in the chat. And I wrote, after I came to the Co-Creating Europe gathering in Plovdiv last year. And Plovdiv in Bulgaria, I had never been to Bulgaria. So it was very fascinating because Plovdiv last year was the creative city of Europe. So it had its own special focus. And if you can see my screen, can you see it now, Julian?
Yes.
Yes. So there's a beautiful map that is actually very old, called Lady Europe, where Europe was imagined as a person, in this case, a queen, a royalty whose head stretched from the Azores right over to her skirts on the Urals. So really a definite trans-European conception of Europe. And when I came back, what I was sort of energized to write about, the topic of this blog was co-creating Europe. What have cities got to do with it? Kind of reiterating that old song, you know, what has anything got to do with the world, creating Europe and cities? I thought this personing of Europe aligned with what you just pointed to. The Gaia's reflective organ is a phrase I heard James Lovelock use. James Lovelock is the physicist who coined and pointed out, in his opinion, that the Earth itself was a living system. And so over 20 years old now that he said that, and he had a great deal of courage to come forward and say that, and he was discounted and denied this as a possibility until a lot of the climate science was starting to reveal that indeed the Earth is very responsive and a living system. And in fact, as Elizabeth and Thomas were so articulately describing in the earlier session during this week, that that as living systems, we are of Earth. We have emerged from the galaxy. We have emerged from the star system. We are galactic beings. So if we go from this very large scale down from the universe into the galaxy, into the solar system, into the planet, we can see that we have all evolved, and that as a living system, Earth herself has zones of connectivity that I would say we could look at as ecoregions now. So very much initiated and penetrated and enlivened by the river systems. So the indigenous have for many millennia marked their territories by the river systems, the watersheds. And I thought when I first learned about this on the west coast of Canada, where I used to live, that this made eminent good sense, because from the Earth view, you could see and define territories. And for them, it wasn't just what's mine and what's yours. It was the stewardship of the territories that were marked by these watersheds that was so important. And I feel that's something I long for cities to accept as a responsibility, that they are not only a human habitat, a human hive, but they are interconnected with their ecoregions. Just like the honeybees have an objective to maintain the survival of their hive, but they also pollinate their ecoregions. And in pollinating the ecoregions, they not only make life renewable for all of the living systems in those ecoregions, but they actually create a whole renewable energy system, because as they pollinate flowers and trees, they create energy for next year for them to come back and bring back to their hives. And so it's a beautiful example, the honeybee hive, of a circular economy that has worked for hundreds of millions of years. They've been around for that long. So when we come back to Europe and we look at this beautiful lady Europe, we can see that she has her own organs, just like we do as individuals. And this was how I started to conceive of the city as a living system. I said, well, the city is the human system writ large, because in order for us to live together in collectives, we must figure out how to honor and support all the organs of our particular individual systems, but as a collective. And we must figure out how to do it in a flowing, fluid, renewable, regenerative way, and truly honor the life in our living systems. So that's the first map that made me say, well, I think I can point to Europe as a wonderful example of a meta ecoregion, because there's many cities in Europe, and each city probably represents a different organ. And it is probable, I would say, that the essentials that you've named are the qualities of your trans-European ecoregion, but they're also the qualities of each city, and probably even the holographic qualities of each organ. So does that make some sense, Julian?
Yeah, absolutely. And this Lady Europe picture is really so inspiring to me, especially when we combine it with the city and ecoregion reflection and the essentials. Because what immediately comes to my mind is that Europe, not just in this picture, but always has been perceived as feminine, having a feminine identity, and talking about a shift of consciousness arising and coming to a closer understanding of unity. There is a lot of talk and theorizing about the female energy and integrating the feminine and bringing that to a new, like to be the informing energy of our actions in these days to solve the current meta crisis. And Europe as being feminine could play a very significant part in that. And I find what you've just been doing was so beautiful to me, and really was lighting up something in my mind, because usually cities are perceived as places of being disconnected from nature, being highly artificial, but showing how they're connected, especially with nature, and how when this connection is reconsidered, like in a concept like of cities and ecoregions, I think the European identity, the female identity, that is really about revitalizing things of sustainability and of care can really rise. So that's just very, I'm really inspired by that picture. And another thing coming up is, you mentioned each city might be a different organ of this meta ecoregion Europe. I was wondering about what's the speciality of each of these organs, so how we can figure out what is their special contribution to the bigger whole, what their specific role that this organ is playing, is one question coming up. And another is about is there something like a shared culture between cities? Is there something like a bigger European or even global urban identity and culture arising in all of these cities? Because in co-creating Europe, it's a lot about our dialogue, and a lot about our energy goes into hearing different voices from different countries and regions, and of course also from different cities. And then our approach in the beginning was just inviting people from all over Europe and to bring their experience from their culture. And me living in Berlin for quite a while, and having lived in New York and Vienna and in different cities, always had the feeling, if I go to a gathering like the Co-Creating Europe gathering, I don't really feel I'm coming as a German. I'm more coming in a way like a Berliner, but also as just a very urban person, because the city has been producing subcultures that seem to arise in many cities. I can feel equally at home, or find subcultures, habitats, places in all different cities in Europe and worldwide that really feel like home to me, because I can read the codes, I know the discourses, I know there is value alignment, and so I would be interested to hear your perspective on maybe on a urban culture in general, and the relationship to the very special role that then cities as individual organs are playing in a bigger organism.
Yeah, really beautiful and rich inquiry there, Julian. Thank you. I just wanted to share a couple of more maps that are embedded in this blog that I wrote, because the Lady Europe map is quite old. I can't remember what the date on that one is. But if we zoom forward into right now, in the last couple of years, the organization Eco-Intention has been remapping Europe in terms of energy, and as if the countries and regions, more of the regions, because they're focusing on eco-regions rather than nationalities. And they're finding that there is indeed an organism of Europe that they can map energetically, as you can see with this map that I have now on the screen. And then they also went deeper into that map and identified what they thought were the organs of Europe and the energetic strengths of those organ systems. So if I remember correctly on this map, the darker the color, the more the less strength there is in those localities. And I was kind of smiling because we're looking at a live version of my website here, and I noticed that there's a side trailer of my tweets and social media, and the very top one that's showing here is talking about Thomas Hubel speaking beautifully to the interrelated intelligences in the Integral City GPS. And Thomas Hubel is doing work that I think is incredibly vital to not only Europe, but to the world, because of his summits on healing and trauma. And one of the things that I have also worked with my core team around is the victim, tyrant, rebel, rescuer, survivor, witness relationships that I would say that Elizabeth and Thomas were referencing in many ways when they pointed out that it's quite a miracle that Europe is currently at peace, because it is a region that has a long history of war and as a result created a great deal of trauma. So one of the things that I find reassuring about looking at the honeybees and coming back to these maps of Europe and seeing what needs energetic attention right now is that if you've lived as a species for 100 million years, you've encountered a great deal of life condition challenges and change that you've had to survive. That means the honeybees have had to adapt. They've also had to figure out how to work together. There's about 50,000 to 60,000 bees in a wild hive. And so that when I was looking at the biomimicry potential of these lessons, I thought was very interesting because it's about the size of a small city. And in order for the bees to figure out how to attain a goal that each hive has figured out, which I thought, oh, they have a goal. Now that's very interesting, because when I'm working in organizations, they always want to work towards goals. That's how they figure out strategic plans. And good cities often have master plans, and sometimes they have a goal. Very few cities have yet figured out they have a purpose. But I believe every city does have a purpose. And the purpose is in service to Gaia as a whole. In fact, I've come to believe that the cities have been more or less dreamed through the evolutionary process as potential, and as they emerge and actually manifest on Earth, then we're actually seeing evolution at work. As James Lovelock says, we're Gaia's reflective organs. She has evolved us for a purpose. And if that's the case, then if we think about cities being the human system writ large, and if we look at Europe as being a special case of a meta ecoregion where we can see cities holding organic roles in service to this geographic area, I think there's also a consciousness and cultural quality to this area. And that's one of the reasons the essentials are fascinating to me, because I think you're capturing the consciousness and culture. I would say, coming back to what's the life I see in cities, if we use the integral model, the 4 quadrants, I would say we are not used to looking at the right-hand quadrants. In fact, a lot of the upper right-hand quadrants, which are about biophysical life and realities and perspectives, I think are qualities of what are called smart cities. That's where a lot of the technologies come out of for our cities. If we look at the lower right quadrant, that's where we see the environment, the systems and infrastructures of the city, and that's very much been the perspectives taken by resilient cities. But neither smart cities nor resilient cities are encompassing and including what in the integral model are the left-hand quadrants. The upper left is consciousness. And this is individual consciousness and how our beliefs, our intellect, our emotions, our spirit arise and actually impact, if not innovate and initiate everything that is manifested on the right-hand quadrants. But not only consciousness must be considered. In the lower left quadrant, we have culture. And Europe has this long history of multiple cultures, a truly pluralistic way of identifying truth, beauty, and goodness in life. And these multiple cultures have now come into this unusual quality and entity that we now call the European Union. And the European Union is emerging from a state where all of the countries, nations were very competitive, and has been doing its best since it initiated itself to develop cooperation and collaboration. So when we look at the human body, we are often just awed by the extent to which all of the systems are aligned with one another, flex and flow, and in a healthy body are really a miracle of life. And so we've obviously, as a species, been evolving all of these organs and organic relationships over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. And so when we think of the short time that Europe has come together, it is a miracle that it's emerged to this stage. So I want to just sort of give this picture of Gaia's reflective organ. We have to hold at the larger scale Gaia, and at an inner scale, if you want, her own consciousness and capacity to emerge cities where they've emerged, because just like in the human system, there's probably a natural purpose and reason for any particular city and ecoregion to emerge where it is currently located. So I'll just pause there, Julian, because I do want to introduce something around the four voices of the city, but I just want to pause before I go on to do that and see if you have any questions or comments about what I just shared.
I'm really stunned by the richness and complexity that is reflections that I'm really just letting in. But I would like to use the little pause to invite in as a guest when we have at the door. Annemarie Verhoeven will come in, and I'm sure she will enrich the conversation a lot with talking about the four voices of the city, and also maybe of the integral city meshwork and the practice of meshworking in the context of cities, but also in the co-creating Europe context. Hi, Annemarie. I think you're muted.
You hear me? I'm there.
Now we can. Good morning, Annemarie.
Good morning. Hello. Thank you for letting me in.
Well, you're most welcome. As Julian just said, we are exploring the map of Europe, Lady Europe, the eco-intention way of looking at Europe through the energies and organs. And I had just had a long riff on how that's related to Gaia and Gaia's reflective organ, and the special role that Europe is playing as an ecoregion, holding the rivers that flow and really are the locations where the cities manifest.
I was very interested in learning more also about the role different cultures play in forming and informing the urban space, and about urban culture and how the local and the urban culture feed into the bigger picture of Gaia and of the beautiful concept of Lady Europe that is visualized so nicely in the map that Marilyn has just been showing. And what came to me in that regard when Marilyn was speaking is that, of course, cities are also are such a pluralistic space and place, and also especially cities in Europe are bringing pluralities together, and I'm wondering how this can be integrated, because with co-creating Europe, it's always our approach to have the different voices heard and to create dialogue and create coherence around the center of the essentials. And in cities, as many people from all of these countries are coming together, so it's kind of crystallizing or condensed in that space. And I'm sensing that I think the concept of the four voices of the city and the concept of meshworking actually hold lots of potential to answer the question how this pluralistic urban space can design in a way that holds unity and diversity.
So Julian and Annemarie, maybe what I could do is just show the last little picture of the four voices, and then I think that would be a perfect entree for Annemarie to comment, because I want to introduce not only the four voices, but the 4+1, and that's both invites us to look at meshworking in two different scales. So let me share my screen again. So now we come to a much more less elegant map that was drawn right in Plovdiv to represent the discussion that we were having in our breakout group, which was what have cities got to do with co-creating Europe anyway. So here we can see a stylization of what I was just saying. There's Gaia as a living system. Here's Europe with all of her different cities. You can see they each have a crown. And each of those cities has the four voices I just spoke about. So the four voices are the citizens, the civic managers, and the civic managers include not only who's in City Hall, but the education, healthcare, police, justice, emergency response, all of the public sector that helps cities actually function. The third sector, the lower right, is business and innovators. And the fourth sector is the lower left, which is civil society, or the third sector. And these voices, you can see, are organized in an integral 4 quadrants. And I do think they kind of nicely map onto the I and we on the left-hand side, and the it and the its of our European language conventions of how we tend to take those different perspectives. I found that in working inside cities, any particular city, that the place I start is with a dialogue. And the dialogue includes a purposive invitation to each of these four voices to convene a circle, a dialogic circle. And when we gather, we're really answering some very simple questions. I ask people to tell me what's working around here, what's not working around here, and if you were mayor for a day, what would you imagine you would change? So pretty well everybody has a high comfort to answer those questions. But what they haven't usually done is heard those questions be responded to within one circle, and to see then a whole system. So there's the four voices inside the city. But notice that in Europe, there's multiple cities. And so that in fact, just like beehives have the four, in their cases, four roles operating in the hive basically the same way, they have other hives in their ecoregions with which they are co-surviving. Not only the four voices of each city, I say there's 4 +1 voices. The +1 are all the other 4 voices in every other city that any given city is connected with in its flows. So just a little comment, you'll notice there's the river, the symbol flowing through Europe. Of course, there's a number of mighty rivers in Europe, the Danube being one of them, that along those rivers, cities have naturally located. So that's how the four voices and the connections of one city to another can lead and open up the possibilities for meshworking. And maybe we can invite Anna-Marie to make some comments about how that makes sense to the way that she's been doing meshworking with the Hague Center.
Yes, thank you, Marilyn. And it's lovely to see that picture a year after that we were there in Plovdiv, with the group of Co-Creating Europe really looking into these next steps. I think for me, one of the important things is about the unity does not mean that we are taking away the diversity. So it's not so much about that we all have to be doing the same things, not at all. It's about hearing the voices, as you're saying, Marilyn, and noticing the multifaceted sides of things, and then seeing where there is the energy and where we can co-create together, and where we're just respectful and acknowledging that others do something in a different way, which is also fine. It's that making visible, that letting these expressions be there with respect and understanding, and also questioning, also curiosity, and to sense into where and when does it strongly relate to our cultural values that we have developed in our city or in our place as we are feeling as one of the voices. And if you're feeling that it is not met, to ask the questions and to have the conversation and the dialogues. and then to make a choice. But it's the reversing of first making a choice of actually judgment, and then not looking into, can I be curious and see what's going on and understand? And that enriches all our lives and all our visions and all our parts, but it also opens up to such beautiful new possibilities and different ways of living together, working together, coming together. And that also, of course, is not always easy, because there are things that you might be attached to. I am attached to certain things in my environment, but change is also inherent. It's about how can I respond to that change that makes it a problem, a crisis, or an opportunity, and a source of abundance. And our way of looking at society and the way that we're teaching our children and ourselves is actually much more still based on it all needs to be the same because that's efficient and effective. Because of course, a lot of these systems were designed in the industrial age, in the time when we were trying to find those ways of developing some kind of a rhythm and coherence in order to be more productive or effective, etc. in those times. But now there's something else that is needed. So there is that the complexity, I think, is that the old systems are actually bringing us into a certain way of being, and there's something else that is really life affirming and that is being required. And a lot of I would say the part of what we're trying to do and achieve, and what I'm seeing as co-creating Europe, is to actually just do it in that sense, and practice and show what that gives and how that can be expressed, and what kind of energy that can unleash, and what capacity. And that's why I think it's so important, and that's why I also really yeah, Julian, great that you're doing that already, bringing in the arts, the forms, especially the social arts, that are making visible with beauty, with rawness, with whatever forms an artist does that, these explorations about the diversity in the unity, and then somehow playfully showing when something looks very different, how there might be somehow a connection that you hadn't realized. That is supportive and helpful, and also is on a level of inspiration, and if we speak about energy vibration, that can help people open their hearts and rest perhaps a little bit more in, even when it can become fearful. Because when, of course, when we come into fear, you know, our body just responds, and things close and shut down, and other parts of our brain light up and try to take over. So finding ways that we can invite people into spaces where they can feel safe enough to not go into that. And if they are in that state, to see and acknowledge and to I hear you, not to save, but to be able to address and presence it. I think that could also be something that, with Co-Creating Europe and the practice that many of our fellow travelers have in having these dialogues and having these kind of exchanges from this sense of curiosity, there are other ways. What do they look like? That is a contribution we can be making, and with the body of knowledge and experience and the maps that Integral City offers, a power for that, for me, is the fact that it is so inclusive. It is so helping to exactly see this diversity, and where are then these roots, and where is then somewhere that essence of unity. And if we look at the bees as an important source of inspiration, you know, if I look at the bees, what on earth has a bee got to do with my cat? My cat sometimes tries to chase them, but they are, of course, somehow interconnected. And we need also for that, you know, we have these, so it's not so strange that when these expressions are so different, we don't always understand how the connections are, but they're there, and we know that, and we can share and play with that and make that visible. Also,
I'm really happy with the arts in, because I realize every day how much they have shaped. Oh, I'm hearing myself now. How much the art has been shaping the urban space of Berlin, and helping Berlin with its history of separation, really to unite again and to become one. I feel art has played a major role for making healing and reconciliation between the eastern and the western part of Germany and of the city happen, allowing creative dialogue around the collective trauma that is manifested in this city to such a high extent. But after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Berlin, for a reason, and it was not just because life was relatively cheap here, has been attracting artists from all over Europe, in the end, all over the world, to come here and work on designing that space in a uniquely creative way. And I feel really through the impact of the art and the creative dialogue, Berlin could become this like really international and still progressive and very, very exclusive, inclusive place that it's just known to be. But another and the other ways is the dialogue that you mentioned, and I feel a lot of this has been nourished and fostered by Co-Creating Europe, and it's also one of the branches of our upcoming Co-Creating Europe Caravan of Unity that joins the bigger movement towards Peace Weekend 2020 created by Unity Earth. And the Co-Creating Europe Caravan of Unity is actually exploring the many dimensions of peace in spirit, art, dialogue, and action. And of course, like the essentials are kind of holistic nature. I feel those 4 branches of the caravan are as well. So I'm very curious which projects will arrive within the caravan about dialogue and art, but also how these can overlap. And you've mentioned the maps before, and Marilyn and I had very interesting and inspiring conversations about a project around life maps that I think can potentially embrace the dialogue and the art, and foster a dialogue between the 4 voices in different cities.
So shall I say a little bit about that, Julian?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Anna-Marie, to remind us about the diversity and the unity, especially after our exploration yesterday in the meshworking with Adrian. That was really just beautiful. I had talked with Julian about what I want to share. The last little part of my screen with the same hand-drawn map had in the lower left corner what I call the Master Code of Care. And it shows that we must care for ourselves so we can care for others. So together we can care for our places, that's our cities and ecoregions, and all together we can care for the planet. So I believe that that is actually the heart of the evolutionary intelligence, which lies right at the core of the GPS for the integral city. So with that in mind, when Julia and I started exploring how could integral city integrate with the Unity Caravan, I felt strongly that there was something inspiring about the Master Code of Care, and we started to imagine, what if there was random acts of care that occurred in different cities in Europe? And if we think of the maps that we just looked at, that we not only have the Lady Europe map, but the eco-intention one showing the different strengths. There's another map that Julian has shared with me. I don't know if we have it handy to show this morning, it doesn't matter, called Meropa, that shows the cities of Europe that are like a metro map. So it's got the little tubular connections that show between the cities. And when I was staring at that, thinking about the Master Code and imagining something like an installation art process, I thought, wow, we have something completely different. Yes, that, the Metropa. And thank you, Julian. I was thinking that we have amongst the Integral City community of practice, Ellen Van Dongen, who has created a whole process. I call it a game. She would call it play. And I think either works, but play is so important to discover the diversity in unity. And play is what makes us curious. And gives us a lot of happy feedback, I think, at the same time. So I thought that it might be possible to combine these, and I have put in a proposal to Co-Creating Europe and the Unity Caravan that Ellen bring her life maps, and that two people who had been interested in working with Integral City had taken some of the training. Someone from Lithuania, another person who's just moving to Lisbon. They're both of a younger generation than me by 2 or 3 generations. And I imagined that they could attract young people, or it could be a transgenerational group, to show up in a public place, bring their table, bring their chairs, and lay out the posters that the life maps are played with, and just start to engage in a way that what they're exploring is this Master Code of Care, and noticing in their city, how do we practice caring for self, others, place, and planet? So that's what we're exploring this week to see if we can take it to the next step. It looks like it's quite possible. Maybe, Julian, we can get back the gallery view again, and we can just have a little bit further exploration of this idea, because it would be in some ways like identifying the nodes where mesh working could happen, because it would be like opening up the 4 voices. That's also what I imagined, that we would have representatives of those 4 voices playing the game, and that there would be witnesses, there would be onlookers, there would be kibitzers, and maybe Ellen said maybe we should have more than 1 table going at the same time. So she's already expanding the idea. And it's really, I think, a playful way to engage the 4 voices in a city. So that's what we're thinking of doing for a Caravan, Anna Marie. And if we manage to figure this out over the summer, then maybe by the time we get to September, we'll be able to be in a different city every day, exploring life maps with the Master Code, or vice versa.
Yeah, I think it also very much shows. I really like it also to use the life maps, because I know that it is something that it is actually the nested hierarchy that you have. One of the other maps of Integral Cities say, and which also of course goes together with the whole worldview of the fact that it's all fractal. So it's and you can do it for yourself, how you're doing it individually, and then how you're doing that with the other voices, and then in your city and in your region, etc.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
And so seeing and experiencing and enjoying it on that level with each other, and you know, some people just have that perspective, and other people just like to see it's larger. Like in our workshop yesterday, some people were responding very much on an individual basis, and others were immediately seeing, oh, this means that if I look at the outside world, it goes that way. We all have our different ways of connecting, and as it's so nested, that gives us important information for next steps, and to also follow the energy, because I think in essence, I would say with meshworking, that also was it. You were saying with Marilyn, the questions you're asking when you come somewhere, what's working here, what's not working, is to, you know, we see that as a way to identify where is the energy.
Yeah.
And let's follow the energy. And in this case, it's the energy of the heart-centered energy. So there's also, of course, a lot saying follow the energy of the money, follow the flow of the money. No, we're looking at the social capital, which is also very much connected to World Unity Week, the Sign Network, Unity Earth. We're following the energy of where the heart intelligence is leading the way in order to make us be able to come together in all kinds of different settings that enhances that and enables that and helps us to be present fully in the now from that kind of space.
Beautiful. I've noticed I've been in quite a few online conferences this spring, and this heart intelligence, this heart energy is really coming through again and again and again, and it's very present here this week. So when I hear this heart energy, I realize my using the word care, as in caring for self, others, places. Care for me is about the compassion, about the heart, about the love. As we were looking at the other night, the unified field, even, it's what's holding us. I think of it as the evolutionary impulse, even. That's what's the energy coming through. And it's as if it does have its own impulse, its own mind, its own heart right now. And it's really feeling that these people who are gathering together here during World Unity Week are really, truly what it wants to encourage to come into even greater manifestation. So I think the time is now. We are who has been invited, and all of our places is where it's going to turn up. Yeah.
Yes.
It's wanting to sprout. Yeah.
And I would like to also, because we're here in the Meshworking Cities and Ecoregions Convergence Room of World Unity Week, and we started this together with John Raymer, who is the founder of Compassionate Games and works very closely also with Compassionate Cities. So I am really curious, and I'm looking forward to, and I tried, you know, we reached out, they wanted to be present, but due to private issues that was not possible, but we're speaking next week with the director of Compassionate Cities, and of course with John with Synergy Games, to see how these things come together and what are the different angle points. Because I presume, or that was a little bit what I got from John, but we haven't really properly had the time and the bandwidth to explore, that in the life maps that Ellen has really designed as an expression and a way to bring the integral city perspective into form as a source of inspiration. So not because that's the best model, but as a source of inspiration that is all inclusive of all life forms. How and very much also connected to, and how does that manifest in action, not only in the coming together, because that's of course an extremely important part. We need to be coming together and we need to have conversations, but what we're also looking for is, and how can we transform and act in a way that in this next coming together, it's more natural and logical that we really live a life from the center of the Master Code of Care. So, I'm just curious to see how the life maps bring, knowing that it's coming from that kind of like, you know, energy sources we have, and as Ellen also very strongly has in the being. How can we come into some kind of a doing that serves the next level of being, and for anybody else to come in that space? Yeah. If that would be something that adds to, and what we can learn from each other with these groups whilst we are doing these expressions.
Yeah, well, you add another level of curiosity. Yeah, we're still in the design stage of the project, so we'll take your question forward.
And it really feels like these maps are actually in their addressing all the voices and all taking into consideration all beings is really what could design the map for the Caravan of Unity, because the driving caravan is traveling, and travelers, at least in some cases, need a map. And I feel this is really the map that could define the route in that the caravan is taken. Because at the very core of the co-creating Europe Caravan of Unity was not having a vehicle that goes from place to place, but having actually energy that's traveling, and energy that is lightening up in places where people step up and take action. And it's this energy that you described as the heart energy, the care energy, or the evolutionary impulse that we want to see traveling and manifesting in many beautiful forms and many places all over Europe and all over the world within the caravan.
And I hear what you're describing, Julian, is really the quality of well-being. And when we looked at Lady Europe, or we look at how the eco-intention mapped the strengths of Europe, that's the intention, that there be well-being as an emergent. And so that by having energy being the caravan connections, that's what I feel like will be creating a well-being field. And that's always been the sort of another meta framework of thinking an integral city. There's no point in thinking about a living system without imagining that it can be as well as it's possible to be evolved. And I feel like the whole evolutionary impulse is just calling forth well-being. And you know, the diversity that has fragmented us now is being called back together, so that we can appreciate the differences in the diversity, but also notice how they are coherent into a whole being. And what Jude Caravan's holographic universe helps us see is that manifests at different scales: the individual, all of our collectives, our places, our ecoregions, the planet as a whole. So it's in us, it's as us, it's through us, it's interconnecting us. So it's pretty exciting, I think.
Yes, and we chose for the mesh working room the GPS of Integral City as a kind of like a compass, again because of its inclusivity, and as a form again of inspiration, because in the four voices, of course, we're very much focusing on letting all the voices be heard but there are also other ways of coming together, and in the GPS, the different intelligences and how that encompass gives an opening to that. So those that want to be focusing or are already like the tree project, which I think is extremely beautiful, simple expression that can really serve us, and that can be done again on an individual level and can enhance conversations on a collective level. And it's also connected to nature. It's letting us understand. So there are many forms that how you can go about with that. So I planted as an experiment when Annette Kaiser from Co-Creating Europe shared about her idea for the tree, as in planting the tree as an expression and an intention for peace, as that's how I translated it in my words, and that's how I did it. I planted 2 trees. And every morning, and I planted them in a way where I'm always passing them when I either go for my morning walk or evening walk, or when I leave the house, whatever. I'm always passing these trees, and I have made it my daily pattern to say good morning to the tree and to say, yes, this is about peace. And you as a tree carry that in you, and you are mirroring it to me. And by just doing that playfully, I mean, you know, I just started off by my children were listening and, oh, okay, what's this, Mum? Oh, yeah, well, why not? Why? Oh, okay. It is every moment when I see the tree, the beauty of the tree, and it's growing. And of course, this is a beautiful time now with the spring. And, you know, also, was it going to was it going to be able to root itself in this new place? And how can I support it to do that? And how can I let it connect and interweave with the other trees? That playfulness of looking at it like that is also a way of contributing. So it can be in such small things and it can be in large things. And it's all a contribution to life and an expression of life and as life.
That's a beautiful story that reminds me of the bees, because that's how they relate to all their flowers every day. Also, Julian and I talked about how can we maybe finish the session off, and I would just introduce my practice every morning and night, which is to practice the karma yoga of the Master Code. And I ask myself for the day, how will I take care of myself? How do I intend to take care of others? Who will they be today? How will I take care of my place? Will that be being or doing or relating? And how am I serving the well-being of the planet? So care at every level. And then at the end of the day, I ask the same questions. Say, how have I cared for myself? How have I cared for others? How have I cared for my place? How have I cared for the planet? It's very simple, but it just keeps giving me the rhythm of the coherence of these carings of the heart energy, right? Yeah.
Beautiful. And I'm realizing that my morning ritual is actually bringing that into practice in the very simple action of watering the plants on my balcony. As the first action of the day. I step out, I sense into the weather, the air, but I water the plants, which feels like it's creating my surrounding, it's taking care of myself by just starting the day very mindful. It's taking care of others. It creates a nice scenery for all the neighbors. It's taking care of my place, definitely. And in the end, planting and creating, like recreating our connection and my personal connection to nature is very present in that as well. So it's very, but I never thought, I just intuitively do it. And now I can see it in the bigger picture.
You can become simply mindful of the practice.
And you can also then after that forget that again and just enjoy doing it. I think what it's about for me is that in humbleness, knowing that every moment of me, myself in this system matters, as does every moment of everything else as well. Because we are all the expressions of that, in whatever form. If we're not that, what are we then? I mean, I don't know. So it's just like, okay, let it just be as simple as that.
That's simple.
And that is the first thing that I can take care of. Yes, I happen to be able to do that. I am privileged enough to do that. That's not for everybody. So also to realize that and to cherish the fact that I have that opportunity in my life conditions and where I am at, and that's not for everybody and everything, and how can we ensure that that can be rippled out and moved into places. But as the Master Code says, you first also have to take care of yourself in order to do that.
Because you're really the energy that starts the ripple effect, the feedback loop. Yeah. Thank you. Beautiful.
I was in the mountains in Switzerland, and it was this amazing place. I didn't know. My husband was bringing me to this lake, and I sat there and I was throwing a little stone. Oh, my cat likes this story. and what I noticed actually it was very clear. There was no wind, and so I just dropped something small in the water, and the ripples came. And what I noticed actually for the first time was that in front of me, in the part in front of me, the water was already back into being a mirror, but I could see the ripples at the other side of the lake still going. And I thought, oh yes, of course. This is it. It's even in this lake. I can see that yes, I started and I thought it was all, and I was going into the next looking at it as, but if I look up, I can still see the ripples, the effects of that it had that I had no idea of. And then my husband said, come walk with me, Martin. And we walked up and I looked down and the lake was shaped as a heart. I mean, really, it was so beautiful. It was kind of like, okay, I get it. So the resonance that we, and the love that we spread, it really matters. It all matters.
Yeah. Such a beautiful story, Anna-Marie. You don't know because you weren't here at the beginning. It's brought us right back to the beginning of co-creating Europe with Annette in Switzerland.
Oh,
Same country.
Beautiful mountains there. Yeah.
Because Julian started with that story. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This is it's really beautiful and inspiring and rich.
Well, thank you for asking your questions and your ever ongoing curiosity and your willingness to serve, Julian. That matters too.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me into the conversation today. It was lovely.